This is The Changed Physician, episode 177.
Hey folks, welcome back to The Changed Physician. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, who talks fast and sometimes slurs his words, along with my Amazeballs co-host, Dr. Melissa Katie, who tends to not slur her words or garble them up as bad as I do.
But go on tangents.
Tangent going, but you usually do it clearly. And
Okay.
you're not, you know, I have a tendency to talk fast. Actually, I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and one of the attendees who'd seen me talk lots of times actually messaged me. He's like, I didn't know, because they condensed my time.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually need for my basic kind of lecture, I'm 40 minutes is pushing it, but usually like 50 minutes. And they gave me 30.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we want you to cover this. I'm like, oh. So I did the not the good thing, which is I compensated by increasing speed of voice. And anyway, this guy messaged me. He's like, I didn't think you could talk any faster, but you can.
You can. Nice.
But for the everybody out there, don't do that. Like, really, what I should have done is really worked harder on condensing the presentation rather than talking fast. That's not a good presentation style. That's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is this old saying that I heard many, many years ago, and I'm not exactly sure who I heard it from, but it was definitely when I was early in practice, was the three things, the three potentials when it comes to your career.
Yes.
And the conundrum associated with them. So have you heard of these? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Like,
probably not. You tend to know things that I don't.
Well, I'm going to say it because most people heard this. Like, if you've ever heard that there's three things that you look for in a career: there's location, there's lifestyle, and there's money. And then the conundrum is you can pick any two. So you can pick.
You mean you can't have all three?
And I'm sure maybe someone's, I have all three, Dr. Cuccaro. Well, you're super rare, because most people aren't going to be able to have for all three. And I think for medicine, really specifically, it is incredibly hard to get all three. Now that I said that, I'm like, I think I can think of one example, a counter example to this, but it is super rare, and it just sort of, it would never happen to most people. Like, so don't even plan on it. It's like, that doesn't happen. But basically, so there's these things like location, and location is usually referring to something more of a higher demand area. And apologies to people in the Midwest, but generally people they want to live on the coast. You're looking at some sort of coastal location or a major big metropolitan area, which typically everybody, I should say everybody, because someone's going to say, oh, I don't want to live there. But in general, the high demand areas for location. Mm-hmm. Then that second was lifestyle. So that is what kind of practice that you're involved in.
Yep. And
whether or not you have a good quality of life. So that may mean, what does that exactly mean? A call schedule that isn't killing you, perhaps home call if you're specialties that do that, or if you're a surgical or procedural based specialty that has, you're not Q3 or Q2 or Q1 in some situations, but something that has good quality of life, maybe hours. And if you're in primary, there's jobs that'll have 4-day work weeks, and let's say actual 4 days, not the ones that are being sold, where it's like 4 days or 4.5 days, but then you fill up an extra 15 hours with a bunch of garbage admin work. So you're still working like 80 hours. So the lifestyle aspect to it. And then finally is the financial aspect, making money. And, because it is fascinating to me, as much as we complain about medicine, or people complain about medicine, the amount of money that some people earn, or the potentials out there, can be frankly ridiculous. Like, it is, it's crazy. And we both came from pretty high pay specialties and chose not to pursue those for most of, kind of like this, like these three things, but which two do you pick? But I always remember thinking about that. And then I say, but it kind of influences your decision. So I must have heard it when I was in the Navy. In the Navy, my location was picked. I just happened to luck out, and I was in San Diego. What I was getting paid was good on the Navy scale, but peanuts in the medical world. All right. For sure. And then, but the lifestyle was pretty good unless you got deployed. Obviously, you had the deployment thing. And in my department, they actually recognized that. So if you weren't deployed, or if you were returning from a deployment, they really tried to make your schedule they try to give you treat you really, really well, which not all of the departments did. Some of them were pretty brutal.
Right.
But that influenced when I moved, that kind of thing. So yeah. And I think for me, the two that I would have chosen was lifestyle and then location. With the caveat, my location is different because I don't like big cities, but I do like the West Coast. Like I love being on the West Coast, and I love the environment. And so we picked probably what we call a medium cost of living area when you look at everything else. But those are the two big ones for me.
Yeah. Well, it's first of all, I was going to make a comment for anyone who's not medical that heard Kevin say Q3, Q2, Q1.
Oh, yeah.
It's like every 3 days or every 2 days or every 1 day. And sometimes you have to work post call the next day, and sometimes you get the day off. So just for clarification, but you mentioning those three things, I was thinking about when I finished my training in San Antonio, like literally the next day after I finished, I'm like, I moved that weekend to Austin.
Were you from Austin originally, or how did?
I was born in San Antonio and grew up in the Dallas area.
So had you had exposure? Like what made you pick Austin?
Because I went to school, college.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I fell in love with it there. So 92, that'll set my age right there. I went to Austin. So I've been in and out of Austin ever since. And then I did my training in San Antonio. But I knew I wanted to be back in Austin. So location was probably number one. I didn't have a set job. I was kind of like a nomad. I met people and connected with people because of my training, because I knew the group San Antonio, but I didn't want to live in San Antonio. But I leveraged myself because they really, really desperately needed help. It was an anesthesiologist only group. So you did your own cases, eat what you kill kind of thing. And I said, well, I can give you 2 or 3 days a week. So I pay like 5 or 6% to them to help, file claims, and it all goes in a pot, and percentage of your cases, you get money back. So I'm like, well, I can live in Austin in a 600 square foot apartment and live right off the highway, and then just zip on down to San Antonio an hour away and do my cases and come back. So I did that 2 or 3 days a week. And I kept still seeking out a job to give me the lifestyle I wanted. So I would say that'd be number 2. Of course, you want to be paid decently, but when you first go out there, you kind of know what people get paid, but you're also wanting to live in a certain place and have a lifestyle. So
you're picking basically location and lifestyle.
Yeah.
From the get-go, and that sort of makes sense. So even though you're only working 3 days, and you may have chosen that commute, which people will say, well, that doesn't sound like lifestyle. But if you're only doing 3 days a week,
it's bearable. There's a lot of stories to that, but I will say that I was still also trying to figure out if I was going to do pain, which I decided not to. But I ended up working for someone that needed help. So it's like you kind of put your foot in the door, and then you see if you like it and if it's working with your lifestyle. And I knew I didn't want to be one of the 2 big groups in Austin, because I think I inherently knew the lifestyle wasn't there.
Well, and that's the thing is in those location, high demand locations, the groups have again they can dictate a little bit more.
Yeah, it squeezes out opportunities for being a solo person.
Yeah. And that's one of the weird things, again, kind of about medicine as compared to some of these things. Because like if you go in the Bay Area and you're a computer programmer and you're a great computer programmer, cost of living's high, but there's this potential for growth that is simply these high demand locations also have high potential for growth. Or if you're an investment banker and you're living in New York City. But for medicine, it's kind of totally opposite. Like the high demand locations actually have generally the lowest associated salaries with them.
Yes. Yeah. That's definitely what I was going to tell you is Austin seems like with its higher cost of living that, you just look at the real estate market right now, it's like insane. Well, everywhere I think there's kind of going to change, but for however long it lasts. But compared to Dallas and Houston, you're going to get paid less in Austin. So I was still willing to take that. And to be honest, other than like last year, which is crazy, cosmetic surgery. Actually, there's a study I heard through a plastic surgeon that 30% increase in facial plastic surgery over the prior year during the pandemic.
Whoa.
For probably a lot of reasons, but so I've directly benefited from that. But I would say in any other year, I think I've always been on the lower end of most of my colleagues in other parts of the country or state.
Mhm.
I've
Well,
never
but you were working part-time as well, or you weren't
4 days
focused-
a week taking
Yeah.
call.
Okay.
Yeah, almost full time, to be honest. 1 to 2 days a week on call, and it was, low volume, but yeah, I mean, I would say it's pretty much a lifestyle thing. But when you look at some people out in the rural areas getting paid a lot more, and they don't have the same volume,
Yeah.
I definitely don't think I could ever make money the priority over the other two things.
And that's different. And I think that's a really important decision that people need to make pretty early on, is to recognize what those priorities are, right? Because if you aren't aware and consciously making that decision, then I think that provides a even greater room of potential burnout in there.
Yes.
Because they feel trapped and they're like blah 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 blah, and then like, well, I have to do this, and I have no choices, and I have to be in this location, and I need this amount of money, and then they're like, but I want this lifestyle, and then that creates this goal conflict that can be so profound.
Yeah.
And how many times can I just see that all the time, is people make these artificial boundaries of what are really wants, right? We all want all three.
Yeah.
We want the lifestyle, the location, and the money. But determining what exactly it is that you need in order to be satisfied, or that are really important to you, that's truly the key there. And I guess that's one of the reasons I want to talk about this, because people will live in these very high cost of living areas, where they're not making a lot of money, and they have not the greatest lifestyle, and then they artificially say that they, I have to have my kids in a private school. Oh, I have to have this $1.2 million house. Oh, I have to do this. It's like you're constructing that by not recognizing, okay, well, if you sort of look at the global thing for medicine and you say, okay, well, all right, if I have these few choices, which two of them are really, really important to me, and then come from there, there's a way to offload sort of that goal conflict. Because then you're choosing rather than reacting and flailing all over the place.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I want to say something about that. It's on my head.
You can't say anything.
So the intentionality behind decision making early on, like anyone who's listening that's a new, like about to embark on their first job or changing jobs or whatnot, I think there's a couple things I was thinking about. Is by thinking about these three things and what's most important to you, I think understanding that you are setting yourself with these internal expectations, whether it's comparing yourself with others or whatever. If you really try to dial down what's really important to you, and what's kind of like the minimal, that's kind of what I use. It's almost the perfect time to really evaluate, because you've been being paid pennies for the amount of hours you put in your training. And you think to yourself, oh my gosh, that money just looks so amazing, but if it's kind of like if you make it good enough compared to where you were, you can actually be content with that there. And you can always scale up if you need to, but if you start living your lifestyle within the confines of a more modest income, whether you work full-time or not, then if it's just hard to go back. If you go to 500, 600,000 a year and you're working your tail off, you start living into, we've talked about this before, you start living into that money and that lifestyle. And it's amazing how quickly money can just like fly out of your account. but I think if you set those early expectations of, like, for me, it was like 10 grand a month would make me happy, compared to what I was making before. But I would make a little bit more than that, but it would define me kind of what I would live within, what kind of means I would live within. And the other thing is just designing the lifestyle. Like, you're seeking out what's that lifestyle. Well, here's the other thing. If you come to a job and you're brand new, if you set the expectations with your employer as to what is important to you, and you say, I want to work 4 days a week, trust me, I have talked to colleagues who have been full-time and want to go back to 4 or done what I did, and they don't get it. And so, or they get, kind of like vilified for it, and it's just not cool. So if you just establish the lifestyle you want from the get-go and don't get to the miserable state, or you're less miserable than your other counterparts, it keeps you from burning out as much. I mean, I think this is like one of the most important things that I'm grateful that I did from the very beginning. And I started slipping into that too much, and lifestyle was, and I'm busy right now, but in a different autonomous way. But yeah, I think that's really important, that those 3 things, you can actually tailor the lifestyle based on what you're willing to give an employer if you're going to work for somebody.
Well, you're coming in with, like, I love that word, intentionality. You have that once you become aware, then you can act with intention. And that's really the key. And that is such an important point, what you said about setting expectations. And
if they don't want you,
then they don't want you.
Next.
And here's the other, and that's a people get so scared. They're like, oh, well, what if I don't, what if they don't want me? Well, if they don't want you, or they're not willing to deal with you, then can you imagine working there? Yeah. Like, where they're not wanting to treat you as a person, and at least kind of, and it better to not fall into that right away versus, getting there. I mean, there's a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of these mistakes where you go and you buy a house, and then you're there, and then you figure out the job isn't what you wanted, or, I mean, all the stuff that you said, oh, I'm going to be an attending now, I'm going in, let's buy a house in San Diego. That was dumb. I mean, all the stupid things, because I wasn't aware enough to actually act with intention, because I hadn't spent the time to kind of figure out and map out, become really aware of the issues. And it was purely on me, because people tried to tell me and I just didn't listen. So hopefully, if you're listening to this, listen, listen, particularly if you're early in your career.
Well, I think I, along with many others that I know, struggle with valuing yourself and what, because a lot of people who can be super generous can over dedicate themselves to an entity, and kind of get taken advantage of. And you kind of have to set boundaries. I think there are people that are way smarter and less stubborn than me that probably can learn the lessons earlier than I did about things. But I'm realizing and recognizing, because a lot of physicians are so independent and really good about, like, they're smart. They got to be smart enough to get through medical school. But a lot of times I feel like we go about it alone and internalize and try to make up our own mind. And I realize that in my 40s now, that it'd be really valuable for me to just say, hey, to a friend, like, can I just run something by you? I just want to see I want to be open to, like, thinking about things before I, like, make a decision that changes the trajectory of my life. Like, you don't always realize the long-term consequences sometimes of your decisions, or maybe the mistake you're about to make. And having a few really, wise people, or people that just see things outside of your head, I think it's just a really good practice that I'm trying to be better at that. Even with my, even with my spouse, like, sometimes I just, like, make all the decisions myself and put all the pressure on myself, when you got all these resources. Like, when I come to you about things, and I'm like, oh my God, why did I do that? Yeah. So I think with all these things you're talking about, these 3 things, running those by people and realizing that, have a little more awareness outside your own head, and be intentional, and really think a little bit before you just kind of, like, emotionally feel like, oh, that house would be amazing, like.
Yeah, in all of those, you can then define, like, if the little bit of awareness. So location. Oh, I've never lived. If I was someone and saying, okay, so you just chose Austin. Austin is known to be a cool town. But you've lived in Austin, so that location then has some basis in fact and experience, versus somebody who says, I want to live in Hawaii, or I want to live in New York City, and they've never lived there. That's fine.
Yeah.
But just know that you're making that decision with a lot more imperfect data.
Yeah.
And be willing to be flexible about it.
Yeah.
So
there's insiders, you can find some Facebook groups, physicians, and those.
Well, and it can, I mean, when I moved up here, when I moved to Oregon, the first things that I did is I actually found the group I ended up joining. There was a classmate of mine from medical school who was with that group. Now, we weren't great friends.
Yeah.
Barely even knew each other, but we have that shared background. And so I contacted him and I'm like, hey, are you guys looking for whatever? And so you at least talk to people. And actually the town that we live in was from some other person. I don't even know how I met this person. I've never seen him in person. I have no idea how I actually got in contact with him, but they're the one who said, oh, I was looking at Corvallis, and I was like, I've never even heard of that place. And I looked at him like, that sounds really cool for a bunch of different reasons. But I do, I guess, so I guess with the point of this, like all of our episodes, is to bring an awareness to these kind of categories. That location is important. I think understanding though what that location is, are you acting on good data or imperfect data? Have you been there or not? You still can be focused on it and go there, but just make sure that you're making decisions that can be flexible now. The lifestyle is a big one. And I think lifestyle and the money come by setting expectations, because if you're, we focus a lot on lifestyle because I think we're both lifestyle minded. We know that there's a lot more to it. We value that a lot more. I'm not going to ignore the people who are really, really financially like money focused. It doesn't drive me, but if it drives you, that's okay, as long as you're not hurting anybody. But if you know that's important to you, then you can come in when you're searching for that job with the expectation that these are your salary demands, or these are your productivity demands, and these are the things that you want. If you're a lifestyle focused, then that's your primary focus, and then you can come in and set those expectations up. Because you made such a great point. It is so much easier to add on later than to back away from. Starting full-time and going part-time. Part of it is because health systems are stupid as all get out, and these people are idiots. They will rather burn out and kill and get rid of and then spend 250,000 plus trying to recruit new docs. And so you may be arguing the whole time about how I want to go to part-time now. And they'll say, no. And then they'll hire someone for part-time, pissing you off and losing you.
Yes. Oh yes.
But that's a whole different discussion. But what it does, what the thing is, if you had stepped in and said, I'm only going to work part-time, and then they hire you part-time, and then say, hey, we want to increase, or we need you to work more. And then you say, well, I will consider it, or I'm going to do this on a trial basis. You're bargaining. You're such a better setup for such a better position. But you can't, you have to know that is absolutely key for you when you're going in, rather than decide, well, lifestyle is important, but you know what? They only have a full-time position, and then I'll work here a couple of years, and then maybe. No. That that may turn out, but you're putting so much into chance rather than acting with intention from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because sometimes just putting yourself in part-time also, even if, as in medicine, it's stressful in and of itself. If you care about your patients, and the whole environment can be toxic at times. So if you don't have a lot of choices, then sometimes, as far as locations, for some reason, you're able to better, I think, handle stuff if you're only there part of the time. So basic stuff. But any last thoughts?
No, I think you should take us out. There's a lot of different thoughts, but then they would lead into other conversations. And
that's why I'm thinking. I think that this whole location and lifestyle and money issues, just this little conversation makes you realize how many other things are kind of tied into and wrapped into those topics, because it's actually there's much deeper topics hidden within each of those. So I'm sure we'll expand on those in coming episodes. But thank you for those who've been listening to the Change Physician podcast. And if you don't know what the Change Physician is all about, you can go to our website at thechangephysician.com and join us if you'd like to be part of the community, whether you're a physician or a physician ally. And of course, check out all our podcast episodes and all the main venues. We also have the YouTube video version of these episodes as well. And you can check out Instagram for occasional alerts as to what our recent episodes have been. But until next time, I'm Melissa Katie, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Stay well, folks.